Okay, so today I'm going to teach you the basics of Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator is part of Adobe's Creative Suite package, which includes Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe InDesign, formerly a web design program, Fireworks, and a couple other programs that you don't need to worry about. The ones you need to worry about for your own learning are Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. And it's important to start by comparing Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Photoshop is a bitmap-based program, meaning that every object has a resolution. So this triangle here that I've found on Wikipedia exists as a collection of points, and these points represented in dots per inch, or DPI. A higher DPI means a higher resolution image. Something around 600 DPI is print quality, whereas 300 or lower would be web quality. This is a bitmap program. Our objects are a collection of points or pixels, and there's a resolution that is associated with it. So I can simply erase parts of this image because it's just a collection of points. If I move this into Illustrator, though, Illustrator is a vector-based program, which means that every object that's in Illustrator is actually the mathematical representation of that object. So a large difference between Photoshop and Illustrator is that the vector drawings in Illustrator are infinitely scalable up or down, because it's the mathematical representation of the object and not a collection of points. So if I select this same triangle and I put it in, it still looks like that same triangle and I can't edit it. And that's because we've just put in a bitmap into a vector program. So in Illustrator, what I need to do is actually draw that triangle. So here's something close to that triangle. And if I zoom it, if I scale it up and down, you see that it looks essentially the same. But if I do that same action in Photoshop, you start to see this stair step function, which is called aliasing. So aliasing doesn't happen in Illustrator because, again, it's the exact object. So we're only going to work with Illustrator from now on. And now you know what the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop is. Okay? Any questions about the difference between bitmap or vector? Have you ever worked with anything that's bitmap or anything that is, have you ever worked with anything that is also bitmap-based editing program?
Probably not.
I bet you have. Is there...
basic stuff is, any photo editing stuff is...
Yes, that's right. Any photo editing software is going to be bitmap-based. Okay. Microsoft Paint is bitmap-based.
Okay.
Okay, so the idea is a collection of pixels or points versus the mathematical representation of the object. Okay, so a line in Photoshop is a collection of points. A line in Adobe Illustrator is the Cartesian coordinates, and it's a vector. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So you actually can't import a bitmap image into Illustrator without doing some conversion, because you need to then convert it into the vector format. All right. I know it's hard for you ladies to see me. Is that alright? Are you fine with just watching the screen? Okay, good. So one of the things that I set up is if I can highlight my mouse by at key points, so when you're watching. Okay. All right. So let's get started using Adobe Illustrator. Everyone should have the program open by now. Maybe you have a file already open, maybe you don't. We're going to start from the very beginning here and open the program and then go File and then New. The New Document window gives you a number of options that may not be familiar to you if you're used to opening documents only in Microsoft Office products. You can name your document. I'm just going to go ahead and name it Test 1. And then it allows you to define a number of artboards. Artboards would be the number of pages that your document has. We're just going to have one artboard, but if you were designing a poster or a series of posters, you might have more than one artboard. This is going to be a letter size. Adobe Illustrator is sort of straddles the line in between a computer-aided design program and a desktop publishing program. There's precision and accuracy involved in the numbers, and so we're going to use a point system. And if we really need to, we'll shift to inches and millimeters. So the units are going to be points. You can see that right here. The orientation of the paper, landscape, portrait, and then the bleed. Bleed's a concept that you probably haven't dealt with in the past, but it means the space in between. It allows you to set a border for the page that you would not print outside of. Your artwork may be contained outside of the bleed, but the bleed is essentially the cut marks when the final work is printed. So we're not going to put bleed marks in. Also note, if you look to the right here, your color mode is CMYK. That stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And your DPI, points per inch, is 300. 300 would be web quality. Go ahead and click OK. And now we have our document. If you have a type of document that you open on a regular basis, you may want to set that up as a template, just like you would in most Windows programs. Just for this time only, let's go File and then Document Setup and take a look at some of the more advanced options that you have here. You can edit your artboards. Okay. Your artboard is defined as the size of your page. So we went to Document Setup and then Artboards, and now we're actually looking at our artboard itself. We can shrink our artboard. Now notice when I take my mouse and drag this artboard to a smaller area, that is reflected on the top horizontal bar in the width and height of our artboard. So take a moment and drag that and notice that it changes. Okay. To get out of this, you can simply click the arrow on the top left. In terms of the workflow of Adobe Illustrator, it's helpful to start by setting up your workspace. Your workspace would be your file that you're currently looking at, but also the functions that are available on the menus. So start by clicking on Window, and then move down to Workspace, and make sure that you have Essentials. If you become a power user of any of the Adobe products, you'll want to set up your own workspace that has some advanced functions or less functions than you currently use. So we have, confirm that you have Essentials, and then click Essentials to set that up if you do not. Just a general overview of what you're looking at here. On the left, you have the functions that you're going to be using to actually make shapes and draw. We're going to go over some of the specific ones. And on the right, you have a series of functions that allow you to control the look, feel, color, and other characteristics of the objects that you're working with. An example of that would be the thickness of a line or the color of a fill. On the top horizontal menu, you have ways to modify or select multiple objects. For example, you can there's a select menu, and you can select You can select all objects that have the same appearance as the object that you currently have selected, or you can select all objects that match the same fill color as the object you have selected. This allows you to work with multiple objects and many objects at once and still characterize and differentiate between them to perform operations on only the ones you are interested in. If we review the idea of the vector versus the bitmap concept, bitmap objects can be opened in Illustrator as an intermediate step towards making a vector object, and that's not done through the open menu, which is intuitively the way that it would be done. It's actually done by a function called place. So let's go File and then Place and actually select an image. I'm going to use this .svg that I got from Wikipedia just to show you what happens when you open an image. I've placed this PNG on the desktop, and I've placed it in Illustrator. So as you can see, it is the extents of the object are shown as the entire image itself. I also, although I want Illustrator to recognize it as an actual triangle, it recognizes it as an image, and the way that I can tell is through number of cues. First of all, it shows it as a rectangle, so there's some background that's missing, but that is actually included in the image. There's also no function to sort of group or ungroup that, and I can't select the individual lines. So this is a bitmap image that is included in Illustrator. Notice that by placing it, I've got and it looks like a bitmap image. It's fuzzy here, aliasing is shown, and I can't edit the individual triangles. Whereas if I import a vector format into Illustrator, I can use the open. So for Illustrator only, if you're going to open bitmap images, you need to place them. If you're going to open something that's a vector format, and a vector format would be a DWG from AutoCAD, a .ai, a .eps, those you can simply click open and navigate simply like normal. All right. Another feature that makes Adobe Illustrator unique is the way that it handles exporting files. With most other programs that you're used to using, you simply save the file and you're done with it. With Illustrator, you actually need to export it into one of the particular image formats that you're looking for. The native format of Adobe Illustrator is an Adobe Illustrator file, which has the extension of .ai. If you want to do something else with what you're working with in Illustrator, you have to compress it to one of the image files that we would normally recognize: a JPEG, a TIFF, a bitmap. And the way that you do that is by navigating to File and then Export. It will ask you to save in any number of formats: a JPEG, a PSD, a PNG, a TIFF, or a BMP, and you will then set the resolution. Resolution is the dots per inch, or the pixels per inch. It will then export that type of file. But if you just navigate to File and then Save, the type of file that it is going to try and save is a .ai file, Adobe Illustrator file. This is not readable by any browser as an image, and so it is an intermediate file in terms of an overall workflow. If you want to print, you can still print from what you're looking at on the screen. You don't need to export to a PDF in order to print it. You simply select print, and this one actually is going to print to a PDF, but you could just as easily print to a printer. Now let's start working on setting up our drawing space. If you look at the space, you see an entire white area. This line here represents the extents of your page, and if I hover over it, I'm shown the word page with an X mark. These are the smart guides that Adobe Illustrator allows you to use that make navigating the environment and lining up your objects much easier. So smart guides can be turned on in one of two ways. The first is just by using the hotkey combination, which is Control U. The second is by selecting Smart Guides if you navigate to the View menu and then move down to Guides. Now, one thing about Illustrator is that although you have the borders of your page shown, you can draw outside of the borders as well. If you attempt to print this as it looks right now, though, this rectangle will not print. So it gives you a giant canvas, drawing canvas to work with, while still working within the guidelines of 8.5 by 11 page that we've set up here. What I'd like you to do now is go to View and turn on Rulers. You can navigate to View and then Rulers and then Show Rulers. And if you see the numbers that are being displayed in this rulers, it's 0, 72, 144, 216. These rulers are being shown in points. And although I like to work in points, I like to see my units in inches. So you can change this by right-clicking on the ruler itself and then selecting inches. Notice that both the X and the Y dimensions turn into inches, and we can see that it's 8.5 by it's 0 by 8 and a little bit. If we want to use a grid to make it easier to model or to draw, we can also go to View and then click Show Grid. And that grid, as you can see, is broken up into 1-inch squares, and there's 10 of them. Sorry, there's 8 of them per inch. So it's broken up into quarter-inch spaces. And you can also select it to when you are modeling, when you are drawing, you can have it. You can do whatever you want, and it will snap to the grid. Another useful modeling tool that we'll be using regularly are guides. And guides can be accessed by making sure that you have your arrow, you have your black arrow, and then left-clicking on any of your ruler and dragging that line. So left click in the Y or the X ruler area and drag either down or right to insert a guide. This is a visual guide. It also will allow you to model based on this. So you can use it to define geometry. The final bit of knowledge that you need before you can start drawing is the idea of layers. If you're familiar with PowerPoint, you know that objects can exist on multiple layers, and it's a very handy way of organizing the visibility of particular objects. Adobe Illustrator has the same functionality. You have layers, which you can use to either group or affect the visibility of particular objects. If you navigate over to the right vertical menu and click the second from the bottom icon. It's called Layers. You'll see that we only have one layer currently, and whatever is contained within that layer, if you open up that drop down arrow, will be shown there. If I left click on that circle, which allows me to select one of these objects, you can see that I've now selected this guide. And if I left click on the other circle, you can see that I've now selected this guide. The advantage of layers as it relates to your familiarity with PowerPoint should be obvious. You can simply use it to organize the visibility of objects by arranging front, forward, move backward, or send to back. You could also do this with multiple layers. You can notice that layer 2 has my white rectangle on it, and layer 1 has my black rectangle on it. And even if I send my white rectangle to the back, because layer 2 is above layer 1, it will not happen. Now, if I move layer 2 below layer 1, you can see that because of the organization of the layers, the white rectangle is below the black rectangle. Alright, so let's clear our drawing template. Let's turn off grids. Let's delete any extra layers that we have, and we'll start drawing. Any questions?
Where was clear drawing?
If you navigate to View, Corey, if you look at my screen, and then move down to Show Grid, just make sure that that's not checked. If you have drawn anything, you can use Control-A to select it all, and then the Delete key. Okay.
And where was the grid lines or whatever, the guides?
All of that's going to be under View. So there are a couple locations. There's View and Rulers. Okay, this Hide Rulers changes to a Show Rulers. There's the guides. Currently I deleted the guides, but you can select Hide Guides, and the guides that you have will not be displayed. And then Grid is that grid, and so you can turn it on or off. This Hide Grid turns to a Show Grid when I click it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Oscar, any questions? Faye? Jade? All right. So let's start drawing by adding shapes and lines. The Line tool is located on the left vertical menu, right below what looks like an old pen. If you left-click the line segment, you can add a line in a number of ways. You can simply left-click and drag to where that line will go, and then let go. You can left-click once and define the length and the angle of that line, and it will be inserted exactly where your mouse clicked. Take some time and add some lines. I'd also like to make sure that if you click View for a second, and scroll down and move your mouse down to snap to grid, make sure that's not selected. You'll know it's not selected if you hover over your lines and you get a visual readout of points and locations. Okay, now if we go back to the line icon and you click and hold with your left mouse button, you see there are a number of different types of lines. Okay, there's this arc tool, there's a spiral tool. Take a second and try out the arc tool. See what happens when you click and drag the arc tool. And then while you're clicking and dragging, hold down the shift key and see what happens. The arc tool is going to remain proportional. And that's the functionality of the shift key when you're sizing something, is it keeps it proportional. Okay? Try out the spiral segment. And when you're done with that, just do Control A and delete everything. Now let's move to lines, to shapes. So there are a number of ways to create shapes in Adobe Illustrator. The simplest way is with the Shapes menu. If you look up at my screen here, you see that there's a rectangle tool. I'd like you to left click and hold until you see the option for others, a rounded rectangle and ellipse, and then I'd like you to click tear off on the far right, and it should pop out. Now if you simply hover over each of these icons, you've got rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star, and flare tool. And we're just going to play with the rectangle. So left click and drag, just left click and see how you can define the width and the height of the rectangle itself. And then play with each of the other tools as well. Particularly try out the ellipse and notice that it is an ellipse. And in order to make a circle, you need to hold the shift key while you're using the ellipse. Notice that when you use the polygon tool and you left click once, you can set the radius as well as the number of sides of your polygon. You can't do that when you click and drag. You only have that option if you simply click. Notice that if you left click once with the star option, you get the option to select the number of points as well. You can set multiple points. There's a star with 20 points. And once you've made a number of shapes, don't delete them, just click the black arrow and stop what you're doing. Okay, any questions on making the shapes? Oh, everybody's got some shape. Yes, Jade.
When I was making my shapes, like every time I would make a shape, it would show it, and then instead of doing a new one, that one would like disappear, and I keep having to turn the layers on and off. Like they wouldn't just all stay on the screen like yours.
How many layers do you have right now?
Just one.
Okay. What PC number are you? Okay, so so show us what was happening and why it wouldn't, and what would happen, okay?
I started like drawing the shape, and then I drew another, that one would like disappear, but it'd still be there.
So the reason is that your shapes don't have a color. So on the left vertical menu, if you see that red line, you see that what? Yes. Now click just below that, and you'll see a white and then a black border, just to the left of that, just to up, down. Yep, right there. Click that. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So now click away. Cancel. Hit the V button. Now click away. There you go. Okay. So that shape has a white fill and a black border. So if you draw a shape from now on, it will have, until you change it, a white fill and a black border. Oh, because you selected that last shape. So if you select if you hit the V button, and then you click that that star that does have, yes, you can change that. Yes, good. Yep. There you go. So if you do Control A, and then hit the white and the black there, and then click away. There you go. All right, great. What I'd like you to do is Control A, and left click the white once in that color picker, and then click the no below it. Click the red diagonal arrow, red diagonal line. There you go. Okay, that's what I want you to go with. And now click away. So now your shapes have a black outline and no fill. All right. And I'd say you can delete about half of them in order to not confuse yourself. So let's. Okay. So there are a couple of concepts that are important in Illustrator to being successful in using the program. The first is making your shape. The second is being able to edit the shapes that you have already selected themselves. And there are a number of selection tools, direct selection and also characteristic selection in Illustrator. Let's start with the direct select tools. If you notice on the top, if you notice on the left vertical menu, you've got two arrows. You have selection tool and then direct selection tool. Direct selection tool is used for selecting vertices, lines, and individual core elements of your objects. And the black arrow is used just for box select or to select whole objects. So if I select this black arrow by either clicking the icon or hitting the V button as the hotkey, you notice that when I hover over and click this rectangle, it selects the entire rectangle. Whereas when I use the direct select by either selecting the icon or clicking A, yeah. There we go. Whereas if I use the A to select the direct select, or I click on this icon here, and I can actually select anchor points themselves, and then I can change those anchor points. So the difference between the direct select and the select is that if I use the select arrow, it selects the whole object. And the direct select selects the individual element. Like in this case, I'm about to select the anchor. And then when I drag that, I'm dragging to move the actual anchor. Take a moment and practice the selection arrow and the direct select arrow and see what sort of things you can change with the direct select arrow versus just the select arrow. handles there. Have you tried dragging those handles and see what they have? Fantastic. So you can make them shorter and longer. Okay. So do you have any idea what those handles do? Can you describe what they do?
Like the vector that's like right there.
So they're controlling the curvature of that line. So if you move that to the 6 o'clock position, yes, you see that? They're controlling the curvature. Okay. How's it going, Jim? Okay. Ah, yes, right. So what you just did was you dragged the line itself, but if you drag the handle, that handle just above your emphasis, click it from the, you have to click it from the actual tip. Yes, try that. I wouldn't go around and circle on it, but you can see how it controls the curvature of that. You can make that handle shorter or longer. Okay, great. Corey, have you figured out the handles here? So if you hit the A button, that's the hotkey for the direct select.
Yep.
And then you click that once. Okay. And then where are okay, so you drag those handles to figure out what it is. You know you can click the handle itself just by clicking it from the tip. You gotta go to the end of that handle. And then you can just move the handle. So what you were doing before was moving the curve, which moves the handle too. But just the way.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, great. All right, so all right, let's look back up here. So by now all of you have figured out that not only can you control the proportionate size of an object itself by using the black arrow, but that you can also control individual elements of each shape using the direct select arrow, and that some of these shapes have these handles that you can change the curvature of a shape. This is the essence of drawing with Illustrator, is using the control points on an object to add curvature or complexity to the shape. These were all created from stock shapes, but we can create shapes from scratch. So let's take what we already have. Let's select all. Let's move it onto one layer. Let's make sure we have it all on one layer. So let's Control A for everything. Open our layers by moving to the right vertical. And then if we have more than one layer, Control A and then Control X to cut it. Add another layer, and then add another layer by clicking this button down here that says Create New Layer, and then moving to your new layer is by selecting that circle, and then use Control F, which pasted everything in front. You should notice that if you select all again by doing Control A, you'll see that you're currently selecting objects on this layer. Alright, so now let's take the layer you just pasted everything onto and turn it off by clicking the eye icon here to make it invisible. And then let's go to layer 1 and work on layer 1 and close the layers dialog here. Now we're going to create a shape from scratch. Okay, so let's make sure that our previously drawn objects are hidden by turning off the layer. Okay, now we're going to draw things by scratch. On the top, on the left vertical menu, you see the pen tool. Alright, left click that pen tool, move your pen tool out into the drawing, and I want you to click and drag. You've just added one point, and that point has a handle. Now I'd like you to click and not drag, just click and release anywhere on the screen. Okay, what you've just drawn is an arc, and that handle that you set with the initial point controls its curvature. Now do another point somewhere. Now that line should be straight. And now move your pen over to the initial point, and notice that to the bottom right of the pen icon itself turns into there's a blank circle. Once you see that clear circle or that white circle, left click once. At this point you should have a closed shape. By closed shape I mean that it is a loop. And now you can hit the V button to shift back to your select tool. And now you have drawn your first shape. So you can use the direct select tool to change the individual anchors. You can also adjust the handles of it. So let's take the shape and play with some color options. First of all, the basic coloring options on Adobe Illustrator are fill and stroke. If you left click your object and then move your mouse down to the left vertical menu, you'll see this box and this box. You notice that mine currently has a white square with a red line through it, and the one below it has is filled with black. So if you hover over this, you notice that it says fill. Fill would be the paint bucket or the fill color of the shape, whereas stroke is the border of the shape. So currently we have a black stroke and no fill. I'd like to add a fill. One easy way to do that is to double click on the fill. This raises the color picker, and you notice that I can scroll through CMYK universe. I'm going to go with a green, and then you can select the color inside of that. You can also enter the hex code, or you can set the actual RGB or CMYK values. Click OK, and you see that the fill of my shape is now green, and that the stroke has not changed. The other place that I can change the color of my shape is over here on the right. There's the color and the color guide, and again green and black. I can adjust the color here by changing the CMYK values. I can also go and change it to black or white, or I can select somewhere from this space. Adobe Illustrator has a color guide which makes it really simple to select colors which are complementary. I can change my fill to any number of these. I'll go back to the color. If I want to change the stroke of my shape, I double click on the stroke here and the color picker comes back up. I'm going to make it a bright magenta. It's a little difficult to see, so I want my stroke to be larger or thicker. So the options are to go over to the right vertical menu, and I click and select the stroke. And you can see that the stroke on my object is 1 point. And if you look at your object while clicking the up arrow on this, you'll see the stroke get wider. It's now up to 16 point, and it's very clear. That. I'm going to go and move it to 3 point. You can also dash the line of your stroke. So notice that I selected dashed line, and you have a couple options for what type of dashes. And the dash itself is going to be 2 point. So just to give you a feel for that, that's what this looks like, dashed line. if you'd like to add some interesting looks to your fill, you can add a gradient by clicking on this swatches, and you can change the color inside to a pattern or a purple radial gradient or another type of gradient. And later, when you get better at this and you know what kind of gradient you want, you can make your own gradient. But the swatches are a nice way to jump in right away without feeling overwhelmed on how to use Illustrator. So one more thing about how to modify your shape. I did this a little out of order. So let's close our color. Let's not worry about color anymore. Let's go back and let's use the selection tool, clicking V or clicking the icon, select our tool. So these handles allow you to scale it, and you can also hold down the Shift key to scale it proportionally. You can scale in any number of directions, but notice that if you choose the vertical and you click and you hold Shift, it still scales proportionally just from that point. Alright. Another thing I'd like you to notice is if you move your mouse outside of that rectangle, you'll see that the icon changes to what looks like a rotate. And indeed, if you left click and move your shape, you'll get a visual readout of the angle you're rotating it, and the object will rotate itself. If you hold down the Shift key, it will rotate in 90-degree and 45-degree increments. So these are just some modeling guides for you. Now, let's say you want to add a bit of perspective to your shape. You can modify it by reflecting it, by shearing it, or by reshaping it. So there's some simple transformation and modification functions that you get here. If you select your shape with the selection tool, right-click, and then move to transform. You have a number of options here. You can move it, you can rotate it, you can reflect it, scale it, or shear it. So let's take a look at the shear just so you can see how it works. It's asking you for a shear angle. It's asking you whether you want to shear it on the horizontal or the vertical axis. And then it gives you the option for an angle that's off the axis. And if you click preview, you'll see that it will shear your shape. Notice that the larger the angle, the more it shears it. I've set 78 degrees here, and it's sheared it quite a bit. Let's play with reflect for a second here. Let's right click on that, and let's go to reflect, transform, and reflect. You can reflect along the horizontal or the vertical axis, and you can copy it or simply reflect your shape itself. I'm going to copy it, and you'll see that it reflected that on the horizontal axis. On the theme of editing your shapes, if you reflect your shape and then drag it so it overlaps with it, you then have the option to do some more editing. If you hover over the left vertical menu to the icon that looks like a Venn diagram, it should say Shape Builder. If you left click that shape, should give you the option to make a shape, an intersected shape. So select your part with the box select, and then click Shape Builder tool, and it will break your part into the intersect. Some other options that you have for your shape are to adjust the width. So if you select your shape and then you hover over the left vertical menu, you left click width here, you see you can warp it, twirl it, pucker it, bloat it, scallop it, crystallize it, or bop it. So I'm going to scallop it. Notice that I get this gun, I get this circle here, and it pulls it out. Take a couple minutes and play around with some of these warping tools and see what your shape looks like when you're done.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Okay, how's it going? Ooh, wow, that's great. Okay, so have you done any of the work into this?
Yeah, I think it was
Okay. The scallop, I like the scallop a lot.
Wait, you're leaving out?
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah. The scariest Rorschach ever. All right, so that's all I really wanted to go through this time, to be honest. Stop this. What questions do you have? We'll play around with it for a little bit more. But what questions do you have based on the content that we just talked about? None. Okay. Well, we'll play.